Two questions related to animal fighting. Your testimony discussed a recent dogfighting case in Michigan that OIG and other law enforcement agencies brought to a conclusion. Do you wait for evidence that non-USDA related criminal activities are involved before taking action on cases of dog or animal fighting? If you proceed alone, how many cases have you pursued alone and how many with law enforcement? Second, the FY21 bill included an increase of $500,000 earmarked for animal fighting and work, and that funding is in the base for FY22. How have you used those funds, and are your resources constrained in terms of your work for animal fighting? You got about 34 seconds for my time.
We'll be happy to provide additional detail in a QFR. But very briefly, we get involved in these cases. We have about 67 open investigations currently. We definitely spent all of the $500,000 last year and more. And we get involved in many different ways through hotline allegations, through referrals from the FBI, referrals from APHIS and the program officials, referrals from state and local law enforcement. Any number of ways that you can think of, we do initiate cases based on that, and we work very closely with our state and local law enforcement partners on these cases.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thanks for our guests being with us. I'd like to try to get to two different areas, if possible, one being animal welfare audits, the other being meatpacking plants. So first on animal welfare, I just want to thank you for honoring my request for an audit around the enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act with respect for dog breeders. I know it got abbreviated because of COVID, but I am looking forward to seeing it, and also the fact that you're going to continue that audit in fiscal year 23. I was just curious if you could share a little more detailed timeline on what I can expect and what will be completed in the product in that. And the second part of the animal welfare question is, as you know, the inadequate Animal Welfare Act enforcement has been a longstanding issue for APHIS. Your office found in a 2010 audit that the agency chose to take little or no enforcement action against serious or repeat violators, which weakened the agency's ability to protect animals. A decade later, we're still seeing puppy mills with hundreds of violations of federal law, and that they get to keep their licenses while the animals in their cages are the ones who are suffering. I appreciate that your office has conducted repeated audits of the agency and made many recommendations for how they can improve, but I'm disappointed that more progress hasn't been made. I'm worried that we're still going to be asking the same question 10 years from now if something doesn't change. So what plans do you have to ensure that APHIS actually fulfills its statutory obligation to enforce the Animal Welfare Act going forward?
Yes, and thank you for your interest in all of that work that we do and have done and will be doing. I'm going to offer the mic to Gil Harden, who has probably more detail on the audit that we're going to do in 23.
Yes, thank you. And Congressman, we do plan to do that work in 23, as you know, and as Phyllis has said, we're starting our movement back into the offices and thinking about doing work on site. So that's why it was pushed to next year. But it will get into looking at more deeply the recommendations we made in the past in terms of enforcement, which we need to do the work on the ground at the sites to know how well that's being enforced or overseen. We did continue to see, problems with oversight and what we could look at this time around, and so we will just continue that look in the future.
And to the second part of the question about ensuring APHIS actually fulfills its statutory obligation in enforcing the Animal Welfare Act?
It will be as part of looking at how they dealt with those recommendations as to whether we can ask questions about how well or how they can better enforce the act.
Okay, thank you. And in the second area, and I noticed Madam Chairman has joined us, so I know this is important to her too, is the COVID outbreaks at the meatpacking plants. Last year we talked about your investigation into food safety and inspection services response to outbreaks of COVID at meatpacking plants. I see that your fiscal year 2022 annual plan includes continuing to evaluate this COVID response at meat slaughter processing establishments. I was wondering again what the scope is on here and when we can expect to see that report, especially with concern on when your office's pulse survey found that 48% of frontline inspectors agreed that FSIS was responsive to safety concerns during the pandemic.
Yes, that audit is very close to completion. I think it's safe to say, Gil, you correct me if I'm wrong, that it should be out in the next few months.
Yes.
And it does, the scope of it is, as you explained or discussed just now, it's what FSIS did with its COVID funds, how it ensured that inspections continued, the steps it took to ensure the safety of its inspectors, and it's whether it had sufficient resources for PPE and other kinds of equipment. So I think you will see that very shortly.
Great. Also, in poultry, I think in your fiscal year 2022 annual plan, you're looking at an audit on the new poultry inspection system. Can you tell us a little bit about that timeline in that report?
Gil, turn it to you.
Yes, that is one we did include it in the plan that we published in October. Because of delays in terms of getting back in the office and actually doing work in the field, we have not started that work as of yet. We will be looking to see if we can start that later this fiscal year or early in 23.
I want to return to the issue of animal fighting. I know a couple of members have asked about this and animal welfare in general, but the USDA does play a major role in animal welfare because you're in charge of enforcing the Animal Welfare Act. And animal fighting is not only cruel and unethical, it can also spread disease. And your role is in particular critical to bringing to justice those that engage in this horrendous act. My question is of Mr. Tyrell. Mr. Tyrell, my fellow animal lovers on this committee, as you can see, there are many, joined me in working hard to increase your budget so that you have the resources needed to successfully locate and identify perpetrators. Can you provide this committee with any details on what your office is doing with the increased funding Congress provided in recent fiscal years? And what are you doing to coordinate efforts with state and local officials to leverage those resources provided to combat animal fighting?
So we work very closely with both APHIS and our federal, state, and local counterparts in looking at the Animal Welfare Act and conducting these investigations. Every allegation we receive, we have to assess carefully to look at the overall impact that each of these allegations may have on a criminal investigation, on whether we should open a criminal investigation. These are very complex investigations, obviously, and we consider a number of factors before we open them, but any allegations of health and safety are really one of our highest priorities. The monies that we received last year went a long way in helping us tackle this problem and put more resources into it. So any additional resources will obviously help us put more focus on this issue and try to bring it under control as best we can.
And coordinating with state and local officials so you can leverage those resources?
We actively coordinate with state and local officials already. So a lot of the allegations that we get concerning animal fighting actually come from our state and local counterparts. And when they reach out to us, we partner up with them and work very closely on trying to combat this problem.
Have you been able to step up enforcement and increase investigations as a result of the funding? Do you have more reach specifically?
We have. So last year, as an example, we nearly saw probably about a 50% increase in the number of investigations that we were able to conduct from the previous year. And, a lot of that can be attributed to the additional funding that we received.
Last year, constituents reached out to my office regarding a USDA licensed tiger exhibitor with a facility in my district. These constituents were horrified to find publicly available inspection reports from the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS, showing repeated violations of the Animal Welfare Act. Some of these violations affected the welfare of the animals, like a lack of veterinary care. Others endangered the community, like insufficient fencing for tigers at another facility in Kansas. The idea of a local Tiger King was scary enough, but APHIS's response added to our angst. We tried for months to get answers from the agency, and we were eventually able to get a staff level briefing. But at that briefing, we were informed that the exhibitor's license had just been canceled. But then we learned last week that APHIS has reversed course and issued a new license to this repeat offender for a facility in Kansas. In a March 2021 report, your office assessed that, quote, APHIS cannot fully ensure the safety of the animals exhibited or the safety of the public who view those animals. In light of this disturbing example, I'm concerned that this is still the case. Ms. Fong, does your office plan to conduct any kind of follow-up to the March 2021 report to evaluate whether APHIS is now able to ensure the safety of animals and the public?
I had not heard of that situation. As you mentioned, we issued that report about a year ago. We don't normally do a follow-up audit a year later. We try to give the agency time to, address our recommendations. That being said, we can go back and take a look to see what the status of our recommendations are, where the agency is with it, and see if there's anything appropriate for us to do at this point.
Yes, ma'am. I think that would be an appropriate course of action. It's clear to me that APHIS has a lot of room for improvement, and OIG's review and recommendations are welcome first step, but these wild animals and our community deserve better.